Welcome to Macondo Festival. Our next session has super incredible panelists featuring Patrice Nganang, José Eduardo, and our very own Yvonne Adhiambo. And this wonderful session will be moderated by Dr. Mshai Mwangola, a performance storyteller and a scholar. Karibu sana.
Good afternoon, everybody. And it sounds like I have people as excited as I am to have this most amazing panel. I am not going to take a lot of time doing introductions because I'm really hoping that most of you got a chance to hear the wonderful conversation we had at 11 o'clock with one of my guests. And we talked a little bit about these two books. So everybody, please join me in welcoming José Eduardo Agualusa. And after this, we have such a treat because we will also be having a book launch by another of my guests. So everybody, please join me in welcoming Patrice Nganang. And then, of course, we also have with us, and this is somebody who most of you do not need any introduction, but I'm very proud to be able to say that I have the first edition of the book Dust. And we all, I'm sure, already have the book Dragonfly. See Yvonne Adhiambo Owuor. So I wanted to start, not so with the books, because what I really want to do is not so much talk about your books, because we have a chance to engage them. And yesterday at the opening ceremony, we had a wonderful time getting a first taste. But I really want to get to know where it is you want to take us. It occurred to me when I was looking and preparing and thinking about this panel that what I have here is a society of reluctant dreamers. And I really want to know, just as a first, just throwing it out there before we talk about Inscribing Africa, what drew you? I know at least one of you says, you know what, I am a dreamer and that's why I wrote a book about dreaming. But then I know others who say that their whole dream in life is to be a custodian for the nation or for the society. I know others who have, just talked about, yesterday we listened to a bit of Yvonne saying that it is damn hard work to do the work that they do. So just as a way of welcoming, I want to ask, why would you put yourselves into this? Who are you? Why do you think Inscribing Africa is so important that you have invested your lives in it? And I'm happy to go with whichever of you wants to start. Karibuni.
Yes. Yeah. So my name is Patrice. It's Tano Sumi Nganang. And I come from Cameroon, Francophone born, English speaker, living in the United States. So I've been writing since I was 13. I can say clearly because I'm in the process of, actually I finished writing my memoir of childhood. So I went through the process of thinking about all the things that brought me to writing. And I think there's one moment I came up with where somebody, essentially, or two people held my hand. And the first was Richard Wright. I actually never thought that Richard Wright's Black Boy would be that important. So because to be able to better write my memoir, I bought the books that I was reading when I was in my teens. So I reread them. And I actually simply noticed that many of those books had to do with writers. So I was reading lots of writers' biographies. And Richard Wright's Black Boy is actually his own autobiography of how he became a writer and what moved him to start writing. So I think these are moments where I, without really thinking about it, because afterwards I forgot Richard Wright. I mean, most black people who are in Lit forgot Richard Wright. The person people talk about is Toni Morrison, or it is James Baldwin, but Richard Wright is essentially a forgotten writer. But he was really at the center of my own thinking when I was 13. So that's when I read Black Boy. But the second is, of course, my teacher. I had because that book was, I was asked to read that book. My teacher used to give me books to read because my teachers loved me. So, and I loved them back. So what he will do was that he will give me books to read, and Black Boy was one of those. And also because he kind of, helped me in a sense of, do that. But the license came essentially from Richard Wright, because his strict mother, his strict aunt, I wanted to say, his strict grandmother, who saw writing as the, devil's work, something like that, or lies. It fascinated me. And but for my teacher, I got somehow the license because, my dad would not read what I wrote. That one was excluded. So then my teacher, Dasi Foso is his name, middle school, he will always read my things, and, he will always grade my things, you see. My personal writing, right? So he will grade those things. He will say, yeah, you can say this, but, the sentence structure is not good, blah, blah, blah. And so that's, I'll say, how I became. So I took it seriously already back then, because Richard Wright took it very seriously. He said, I want to, in the United States, people, a black boy wants to become a writer. You had all those white people saying, you cannot become a writer. So me as a child, I say, how do you dare say that? So I become that.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, shout out to all those teachers out there who look at young people and say, this book, especially, Richard Wright is not an easy book. In his work, many of us would not imagine giving a child of that age a book, and then that just starts a whole thing. And I never thought about what you just said, Patrice, that determination to say, no matter what society says, I will. My own favorite is Lorraine Hansberry, and there's a simple statement in her autobiography, A Raisin in the Sun, where she says, I am a writer. And once you make that declaration, nobody can stop you from that. So thank you very much. Eduardo, it looked like it was going next to you, or was it Yvonne?
Well, my mother was a teacher. So there was a lot of books at my place, at my home. And because I was too shy to have friends, I discovered books, and I start reading, and I never end. And as you say, it's the good books that push us to the literature. No? And I remember the authors that really first impressed me and make me become to want to be a writer. One of them is Garcia Marquez, yes. And I remember to read the first book, and then I read all of them that we had at home. And I start writing like that. And because my first book, I told that in the previous session, was a historic novel set in Luanda in the 19th century. And for me, it's very clear that I start writing, trying to understand myself and trying to understand Angola and trying to understand my place in Angola. And it helps a little bit, yes. Principally because you can't understand the present days in Angola if you don't understand nothing about the past. So it really helps me. Yes.
I guess my story, I think, is pretty similar to José's. A very shy person, books were my best friends. I learned to read very, very early and loved the experimentation. I used to think words, letters actually magical. The idea that you could put C-A-T and spell cat, and then you could put black cat, and you could even visualize suddenly it is the alchemy of what words deliver, almost as if you're the kind of magical making of worlds, just through the power of letters and words. So that sense of awe had struck me very, very early when I was very, very young. But again, as growing up, I so wanted to be invisible. I found the world large, noisy, and intimidating, but the world of literature, finding Lord of the Rings and finding that world felt safer and more real than the outside world. Actually, even books by grace of God, I read widely and wildly. Our home was a home that accommodated books. We had books from all over the world. And actually, ours was the kind of house, bless both my parents, we were the kind of family that would have moved the house, moved properties just so that we could go into a place where the books could be better accommodated. Visitors sometimes would come to the Owuor family over the weekend and knock on the gate, and you think that there was absolutely nobody at home, but we were all at home reading. So books have been very much companions and friends and gate openers of the universe for me. I was also a D student in maths, but an A student in English, literature, composition, and language. And so again, that shout out to teachers is shout out to all my many teachers who believed so powerfully and strangely in the shy girl who could write. But I never ever thought it could turn into anything. I think, hell-bent myself on a kind of corporate destiny, Fortune 500, all those things you imagine. And during one of those kind of personal crisis moments, I ended up working in a hospice in Cape Town to be close to the thing I feared the most, death and dying. But one of the processes, that was a major turning point in my life. In one of the processes, the training processes, we had to write our own, our own eulogies. And you were told to start with, I regret to announce the death of. It was painful for every single one of us, and we struggled with it, but it was a powerful moment. But we were not allowed to leave the space until we managed to write it. So I regret to announce the death of Yvonne Adhiambo Owuor. Write it down. And then the next line is, she was well known for. And it was at that moment that I understood, and I hadn't known for all those many years. The moment of crisis was realizing the thing she was well known for. Then there was silence. Because suddenly the need to say she was well known for her books, and I wasn't writing then. And I didn't know, I had no idea that's what my heart, my soul, or whatever it is wanted the most. And fast forward, I had no idea even what that was going to begin. Fast forward a few years later, and the great phenomenon known as Binyavanga Wainaina happened. And I said I wouldn't be writing if it hadn't been for him. He saw me as a writer long before I saw that in myself. And I remember the story Weight of Whispers that opened the doors of the literary world for me. I wrote it in 5 days to get Binyavanga off my back, because he would call every 2 hours to say, Yvonne, is my story ready? And yeah, that's what happened. That's what happened when I was on my way to somewhere else.
It is... Go ahead. It is so interesting that usually when we talk about writers, we think of writers as individuals, somewhere there on their own. I work, and I'm very drawn to performing, theater, those kind of fields where it's a community of people together. And we often think of writers as solitary beings. But what I'm hearing from all of you is that there's a community. So again, I want to shout out to parents, to friends, who create the spaces, the environment, the encouragement. For those of us who say, I'm not a writer, you're part of this community, and that's a wonderful thing to hear affirmation from all of you. But I just want to take you to something. I was looking at the dictionary, and the word inscribe from the Webster's Dictionary says, 1, to write, engrave, print as a lasting record. 2, to write, engrave, or print characters upon something. I'm going somewhere with this. 3, to dedicate to someone. 4, to draw within a figure so as to touch as many places as possible. And 5, to register the name of a holder of. And I was thinking about this really in relation to what you're doing with your work. And I wonder if any of you wants to speak to any of those definitions. Writing, engraving, printing, because there is a need to make a record. Dedicating it to someone, and if so, to who? Drawing within an existing figure so as to touch as many places as possible. And if so, why do you think you should do that? And then number 5, and I love this one, to register the name of the holder of, to own something. And especially in relation to Africa. Why are you doing this? Because it seems to me, you guys could write about so many things. You could spend your lives doing so many things. And yet this is what I think you've chosen to do, and feel free to contradict me.
I was going to add, since I'll go the other way. Actually, I don't even think, I don't know about how the others feel, I don't even think we choose it. It's almost as if you're, certainly I know for me and for a few other writers, you're pushed by, I don't know, a zeitgeist, something, into this direction. It's not just reluctant dreamers, but you're forced into this reluctant space of purpose. And you have to hold on to it, and every time you resist it, follow the corporate trajectory or whatever it is, all these options.
You're compelled.
You're compelled, and something happens, and there's a disorder within until you make this choice. Quite frankly, nobody sane would have ever choose this path of their own volition, because it is dumb hell. It's hard. But it's also fulfilling in ways that perhaps are not necessarily quantifiable. But back to the question, inscribing, but especially inscribing Africa. So linked to that compulsion, given who we are and where we are from, I can speak about myself. I am born in Africa, and I am, indescribably so, but and undeniably so, of Africa. And that then comes with its own weight, its own burden, but also its own, more than patrimony, or it's a kind of legacy of I don't know, immensities. All right, and that legacy of immensity in this contemporary world is constantly being reduced, constantly being diminished, constantly being forced to fit into a very thin, very narrow idea of what and who Africa is. And that narrow space is what I am supposed to fit into. It's outrageous, actually. Actually, it's obscene, and I refuse to do that. Then that then means then that, the constant idea, and I think, Mshai, once you're the one who said it, that, now when we're speaking about Africa and its waters and its seas, outside the world, even to this day, there's an assumption that where Africa engages with its maritime imagination, it only does so as cargo on somebody else's boat, or as an artisanal fisherman who is terrified of the waters. So the entire legacy of our African, patrimony over the waters, the technologies, the navigational knowledge, the stories of the waters, actually are literally, I was going to say are ignored, but actually no, they're made to disappear, or they're then appropriated and given to somebody else. So I think then, being of Africa and being compelled into the space of a creator, of a writer, and a world builder, I write Africa, and not because I think that I have a great revolutionary fervor, but because I have to. I think the Luos call it juogi, the thing that compels you, that's almost without, beyond your control. I'm obsessed by my continent. I'm obsessed by its histories. I'm obsessed by its possibilities and futures. So that's why I write.
And so many times we feel like we have to run away from that. And you're registering yourself, I belong, this is mine, and I will speak for it, I will speak as I need to.
I wish I was that confident. It's almost when you say, I don't want to do it, but I have to do it. Because if I don't do it, I'll either go mad or, it's almost like you... But yet within that reluctance, there's a kind of pleasure of saying, okay, fine, now you forced me, I'll do it.
I'm coming anyway.
I'm doing it. Yes.
My brothers, does this feel familiar?
Well, when I start writing, I discover that I am the others. And you discover also that when you read. So I really believe that literature, that the books, that reading, develop empathy. Yes, you say it in English, great. So maybe most important thing is that it develops empathy, and that's very important, especially in a country as Angola that we had a long civil war. To develop empathy, to people discover that we are all the others. We are all the others, you know. There are no enemies because the other are you in a certain way. So for me, it's the most important thing that I can say. The importance of literature in our countries. Yes.
So we're not seeing each other as that person there, but together we are forming the humanity of
Yes,
others.
we are all the same. We are all the same. Well, because when you read the book, when you write the book, the exercise all the time is to be the other. You know, you are the other. When during the time you are reading a book, you are this character. You are the person. And when you write, it's the same. You must be, writers are multiple entities, you know, are plural beings. A writer must be a man, must be a woman, must be a young child, must be a gecko. You know? So, and that's why it's so important to have books and to give books to the people to read.
You know, sometimes what frustrates me most about really good fiction, and all of you have done this in one of your other of your books for me, is where you have a character who I really think is an awful person. I really hate them, and yet you bring me into that space and I see their humanity. I might disagree with their choices, I might really loathe them, but perhaps what I loathe most is I'm seeing myself and my ability to be that person also. And that can be a really, really thing for me. But I hear what you're saying, the humanity of others in myself and vice versa. That's an amazing thing. Patrice, what are you inscribing?
Yes, I totally agree with what was said just now. I would like to say, for me, there is not a continuity between that particular young 13 or 12 years old who was writing, being helped by a teacher or having a mentorship, a good mentorship, and reading. You know, my dad had he was a librarian, so therefore I grew up with books around me. That is kind of a given. I mean, you have to read to write, and otherwise it will not work. So I stopped writing after, when I was 18 or 17. I essentially stopped writing, because I simply decided to learn German. So I never liked French. So just to
and you're Cameroonian.
Yeah, and I also never liked France neither. So the two. So therefore, so because I had decided to write, so I was interested in literature. So there was somehow an impetus to continue along those lines, and I had taken the path of, not STEM, but, lit already. Of course, there are other professions, law that are possible, etc. But I felt, I wanted to do something, either philosophy or... But then I stopped writing fully. But what brought me to it, and I think it is brought me back to writing, and there's Shoyinka somewhere, when he talks about his own writing, he says very often, when I started writing seriously. And actually, I will use that phrase of Shoyinka. And actually, I take writing very seriously. I do. So I went to Nigeria, and so it was in 1995. It was when Kenzo Owuor was hanged. So then I was there during the campaign for his release. So Shoyinka was outside drumming, drumming up the world. And I think, in Nigeria, it was a different condition because, it was under Abacha. So I'd never seen something like that. Seeing people really under siege. And, listening to the BBC, what's happening to Nigeria. Nigeria was expelled. Sanctions were falling every single day. Sanctions, we talked about it. Sanctions, and people were under siege. And yet I was living in Germany back then, because, I was a very good student as well. So I got all those scholarships. So I was in Germany, and so I knew the campaigning that was happening in Germany because I was, boycott Shell, all that, And the hanging of Kenzo Owuor, I said, wow, that's amazing. A writer is hanged exactly because of his fighting and because he stands for his community. That stood in my mind as something that writers can do, meaning not that I want to die, but still, that is something, the danger of it, writing is important. So in that moment, I actually finished a novel in 2 weeks. I'd stopped writing before. Imagine that I simply sat. From Nigeria, I finished my first novel, and it was published. And that's how I came back to writing, really. And with the impetus that writing is serious, very serious, and that writers are very serious, and that writers can change the world. Because, of course, after that, Abacha died in conditions that, fit into a Marquez novel. He was making love to a prostitute, and he collapsed, and he died. So that was it. Shoyinka went back home, people clapped, and Nigeria was free. So that is the condition under which I came back to writing. See, I want to be a writer. So I wrote Dog Days under those, conditions. My, novel that back then was quite popular. Very well translated, still is. And so what I'm trying to say is, the seriousness of it. And maybe I'm going to be a little bit long here because the other aspect is, of course, discovering oneself. Because one thing, I've been living in the US now for 22 years. You can imagine having done my studies in German, having defended my dissertation in Germany, taught my first students in German, and they were all Germans. I got my first job in the US now to teach in English. So in the process, two things. The first is that French has actually disappeared in my mind. So in my daily activity, because it was first German and then it is...
You were successful then.
Yes, then it is the US. But my books were written in French, so I was writing for myself in a sense, so my novels. But what I want to say is that discovering oneself is a challenge for any African, because then, for instance, coming back to my names, what are my names? And I discovered that amongst the many names I have, there is one, Tanu, which I actually did not like that much before, but I came to cherish that name a lot, because it is the father of history. It is the father of histories as well. Tanunke, the father of small stories. So along the line, I simply discovered that there is a vision of history that had escaped me totally, and out of which I could actually, record, the things that I see, the seriousness that I want to put into writing. So we'll talk about it, probably, because I have other sessions. But when I say serious, this is not only in the sense of a writer, wanting to die. It is, having, something that says, I'm dead. But in the sense that you are putting yourself in a condition of danger. And that condition of danger includes understanding why you are doing that, where does it come from, and what are actually the shoulders on which you stand to do that.
You've said so much, and I'm thinking about it, and I know I want to come to the audience and get some questions and comments. But perhaps as a last round of questions before we do that, what you said about the seriousness of the work. Now, I don't know about you, but I know in many African countries, and certainly here in Kenya, if I may be as bold as to say it, the arts are seen as something you do when you really don't have anything else to do. You're not as talented as other people. You haven't got a job, so in the meantime, just find something to do. And yet what you said about the seriousness and this idea of leaving a record as Africans for Africa. Let's leave everybody else out first. First and foremost for ourselves, but then also, as Yvonne said, that we are a global continent. We've always been a global continent, and we continue to have so much to offer the entire world. So I want to bring us to this fact that we're talking about inscribing Africa. And Conti Kulin famously asked, what is Africa to me? But also that all three of you seem to want to start by telling us history is important. And not just is history important, the stories we tell about our past to ourselves is important, because some of the stories that we have heard and we have taken in and we believe, those official narratives, are often not what the real history is. And you all, I think all three of you, have this thing of saying there's the official record and that's important, and then there are the small people on the sides whose story is equally important. So history is important, but so is the future. So I want you to link this important work that those of us who are artists are doing, the work of imagination, the work of recording not only the past and the present and helping us understand it, but also imagining this new Africa, what Africa can be, what Africa is already becoming. Because too often it feels to me when people talk about the greatness of Africa, we are told, look back there, right? But not, oh, Africa is great now and Africa is going there. So how do you guys help us see that Africa? What are you imagining when you say the future of the memories that we are recording in the present for you?
If I may disagree with you there a little bit, not a lot, just a little bit. I like to say in the seriousness of it, it is not the content. It is that writing is a very serious matter in the sense that all of us, when we have children, we send them to school to learn how to write. So I don't remember any parent who didn't do that. So we send our kids from the baby age to learn how to write, and that's what we do. We expect our kids to know how to write and how to read as well, those two. So therefore, I tend, no disrespect to cinema or to dance or to whatever. So I tend to think that no parent sends their kids to school to learn how to dance, but to learn how to write. So no parent sends a kid to school to learn how to, do films or to sing. No, it may be beautiful, certainly, but what we do is to send them to school to learn how to write. And learning how to write is a human right. It is fundamental. It is not disputable. So therefore, I tend to say, I tend not to put writing next to cinema, to art, to, no. Writing is the bottom line of everything. Actually, it is the God of everything. So it is the foundation. So that is the way I see it. And for me, it is not even a matter of arguing. It is a matter of schools are state-funded and they are private, and all of us go there to learn how to write. So therefore, that is how I see writing, as something that is enshrined in our human rights. And it is something that we do because even the state forces us to learn how to do that. Now, how the future can look like, of course, since I live in the United States and I see how my own kids, how she learns how to write, this coding that's added to it. So there are many chapters of writing that I did not have when I was growing up. So I would love to add coding to it because it seems to me the future is in coding as well. So when I was still in Cameroon, I had a writer's house where my imagination was that we'll have 50% of it involving coding. So for people to, actually for everybody to learn how to, to do coding, because I could not do that. And I suspect the writing of the future goes from there.
So he's speaking to an oratorist, so we can go back and argue over the importance of writing and all the rest, but I love that thought. I've never thought of it like that. We send our children to school to learn how to write.
Maybe first thing that tonight all countries in Africa is diversity, okay? First of all. And then is creativity, okay? And so when I try to see the future, I see a continent, Africa, that are working is on diversity and the creativity. I mean, it's if you travel in Europe, I remember recently, I did a literary trip in different European countries, and one day I wake up in somewhere, in a hotel, and I didn't know what's the country it was, and I think, no, it's easy. I go to the window and I discover it. I open the window and I will know, and I open the window and there's I don't know a publicity of something, yes, and could be any country in Europe. I mean, they are all equals. But if you cross the border between Angola, for instance, and Namibia, it's totally different. It's like to cross to another planet. And at the same time, it's the same. So the diversity for me, the diversity of the continent, it's something that we must really work on and show the world, yes.
The challenge about being among such kind of splendid writers is that so many thoughts come and then just kind of freeze in your mind because you're thinking, okay, what can I do with this idea? But building on what both Patrice and José has said, let me be frank with you. So I think, José says that the writer has many personalities within. So there is a part of me that is an empire builder. One that wants to say, what would it take for Africa to dominate the world? Dominate the galaxies as well. And then work backwards from that. Okay.
What happened to the shy girl?
That's the other side that's come out in this kind of space. But yes, okay, so what would that actually look like? And then if we had a process where I'd say, okay, now let's work backwards. So Africa's dominated the world. So what has happened? What are the steps that has happened to lead to that particular place? Let's even give a timeline. 2033, for example. Okay, it's 2033, and this is what has happened. So, okay, what are the things that have happened to take us into that point? And that, by the way, is the work of the imagination. And this is now where you draw in not just the writers, the visualists, but this is now where you bring in the artists. I hope the bloody Kenyan government is listening. It's not just STEM. We are the imaginative. We're the ones who imagine the possibilities. But yes. And it's through the imagination of even dramatic and maybe outrageous things like that, that the visions and the plans and the dreams are formed. And these are the dreams that we can infuse not only for ourselves but also to the next generation. So I guess that's the thing. What does inscribing the future look like? If we started from that, if we were dominant, and maybe it's a tender kind of domination, not like the one we've known before. So what does tender domination actually look like? What is dominating the galaxies? Or maybe lead custodian, maybe that's a polite word. The lead custodians of the galaxies. If Africa is the lead custodian of all the galaxies in the world, what does that actually look like? What does it smell like? What does it taste like? What do we see? What do we smell? What do we hear? And who inhabits the spaces?
I can't resist looking back at that essay title, because in Story, Desire, Belonging, Future, one of the things that Yvonne talks about is this cathedral project. And so what is going to be our big empire project? And we've talked about imagining, right? What's the space of imagination? How do we imagine it? How do we see it? How do we believe it? And then in terms of bringing in our creativity in all its diversity, thinking about who are we? We're not just, Africa is not, as they say, a country. It's not just one, every time I move from one African country to the other, from one town in Africa or one village to the other, the diversity is immense. How do we harness that? And then this idea of exploring all the avenues we have to write, even the ones that we didn't have opportunities to learn. And I'm thinking also, Patrice, as you're saying that, I'm stuck on what you said. In your book, you talk about these other forms of writing that people may not necessarily learn in the formal spaces, but they exist. and using all that to be everything we can be. What an amazing, you guys have just given us such an amazing vision. So I want to throw that. I think we have 10, 15 minutes before Anne, who is amazingly running things for us, comes to tell us your time is up and before the lights come off. But may I ask the lights to please come back on? Does anybody have any questions or comments? Because otherwise I'll just keep talking.
Actually, my question is to Patrice, which I think is a very French name. And it's more specifically about Cameroon. I have followed Cameroon quite a bit, and I followed his writings. And one of the questions that has puzzled me is giving the intellectual prowess of the Cameroonian, people like him, and the diversity and the strength of Cameroon. I have always been puzzled why you have ended up having the longest dictator or authoritarian ruler in Africa, because you have such dynamic population and community. As an African, it puzzles me, because I would have felt that by now Cameroon should have moved forward, and you write quite a lot about that, and I would be interested to hear your take. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. I think it is the 1,000 franc question in Cameroon, and I say franc there, also to answer back to your Patrice question. But I've dropped the Patrice. Don't worry about that. So I've switched to Tanu. So my next books are going to be Tanu. So yeah, the first was Alain Patrice. So I think we all moved through stages, and I have 38 names, so I have a few to choose from. It's not a big deal. Now, regarding the question, there is even sometimes a footnote to it. It is not only the dynamism of the Cameroonian intelligentsia, it is also that you have so many who have fancy degrees, and they are all over the place in those fancy universities, but at the same time, they go back to Cameroon in the plane of Macron. And and in a country where people are incarcerated for having walked on the street, or for having done exactly nothing, and they get 10 years in jail, 22 years in jail. I was myself incarcerated, so I've been with them there. So you see, it is one of the most, how can I say it, archaic dictatorships that you've ever seen on the African continent, because as we speak, today is October the 1st. It is the day when the English-speaking Cameroonians became, with Nigeria, because it is the Independence Day of Nigeria, became independent with Nigeria. But they never had a choice to essentially become independent like Kenya had, or like the French-speaking Cameroon had. So I can tell you, if you check your or my Facebook page, you will see that people are being killed in Cameroon right now, and because they speak English. So you see, it is the form of dictatorship we have there. It is yesterday, simply because they always send me those dead body photos, since I'm so involved in it. So they always send me those dead bodies every single day. So yesterday, it is one we shot, he was hiding behind cement. It is a soldier. The day before, it is one who is emasculated, maybe 1 week before, it is one who is beheaded, etc., etc. It is every single day, and it comes on my table. So that is the reality of what Cameroon is. And of course, because I trust and I suspect when I come in Kenya, some of you took French, and you see me, you want to test your French. Bonjour, comment ça va?
Il faut continuer en français.
Oh yeah, that's the beauty of it. I go to South Africa, you see somebody, yeah, bonjour. It's the beauty of it. And I would like to also add to it, I'm sure here in Kenya as well, when you read a newspaper like Le Monde, you believe it's true. You are so happy it is French. You kind of like it's like baguette or croissant. But then when somebody from, if somebody like me tells you, every single day I get, people who are beheaded whose, sex is cut, and because they speak English, the next day you have forgotten it. You'll still come to me and say, hey, comment ça va? That is what is happening in Cameroon. It is that people actually will not understand that the French-speaking countries are actually experiencing the last stages of colonialism. Look around, you're having Burkina Faso. Yesterday, wake up, oh, it is a coup. Are we even talking about that? Of course, it's simply nonsense. They can kill each other. Burkina Faso is the country of Thomas Sankara. It is a country, it's just the second coup in 6 months, you see. And next to it was Guinea, and in Chad you had, these are French-speaking countries we are talking about. You can have a multiplication of those coups, but if I talk about it here, you'll say, yeah, Uganda is the same. No, it's not the same. It is not. It is that France has a grip on a few countries, and France is one of the poorest countries in Europe and survives on the head of those African countries. And if you have a poor colonizer, that is the worst thing that can happen to you. And then I think,
I guess we should worry about what's happening to the British right now.
And I think, Portugal can say something about it. Portugal can't totally, because it was a poor colonizer, whipped by, Guinea-Bissau, whipped by Mozambique, whipped by everybody, whipped every single where. So Portugal can tell the story of being a poor colonizer. So Brazil is going to be a member of the Security Council, and Portugal cannot even show up. That is what it means to be a poor colonizer. But people need to understand that France is a poor colonizer and lives off 14 African countries. Totally sucking up the blood. Last time I went to Paris, I was ashamed. You have sharks everywhere. It is finished. And you have a president who is 42 years old. He says he will not destroy. He's building colonial status in Mali before he was kicked out. Do you know that? Building colonial status in Mali before the French soldiers were kicked out. That is the condition of Cameroon. That is the condition of French-speaking countries. So Biya, 40 years old, he has nothing else to say but to kill and stay in power. And since nobody wants to hear, wants to listen, and since everybody says, yeah, we had that in Uganda, yeah, we had that in Kenya, yeah, Nigeria is the same, it is not the same. So the moment you get that moment Africans will come together and actually struggle, finance, defend those Africans who are being murdered systematically by the French hegemony that people don't want.
Let me really encourage anybody who is saying, I've just realized I know nothing about the history of Cameroon. That's what Patrice does in his trilogy. You go into that history, you begin to look at the nuances of it, and it just strikes me, and I want to thank you for that. You've illustrated why it's so important, especially for those of us who are Anglophone. We tend to know what happens in Anglophone Africa, but it's really important for us to also immerse ourselves in what's going on and what is the history behind Lusophone Africa, behind Francophone Africa, behind those who speak Arabic. We really don't know those parts of Africa, and it's important to understand the headlines coming out of our history. And our future together, which we have agreed we are going to do, is going to have to deal with that history in all its diversity. Thank you for such an excellent question and setting us off into that beautiful discussion. I don't know who's got the mic right now. Okay.
So on taking things seriously and on community, on recording and imagining the future, it's clear what the writers take seriously. They telling stories, writing. So my question is really to all of us here, because we are here to be in conversation and to hopefully not leave here unchanged, to carry the ideas that have been shared here with us. So my question to all of us here is, what do we take very seriously, and what are the ways that we can inscribe Africa? We are not all writers or poets or artists, but we are still very much active narrators in this story and writers in our own ways. So what are these things that we take seriously, and are these things rooted in meeting the needs of our communities?
That's an excellent question, and we're going to actually end with that question. So what I'm going to do is ask each one of you, and you know what, I would love to keep talking to you for the next 3 hours, but then I am getting signals that, because there's such amazing things happening after this, right? So I'm going to ask each one of you just to briefly respond to that. That's a great question that we'll all keep reflecting on as we come to an end. I don't know who would like to go first.
My response to that question, only because of that, almost your version of the summons, was that it's a conversation, it's a dialogue. I'm wondering, Mshai, if it's also possible to pass around those post-it notes, and collect so that will be my response, to collect the ideas, responses, and questions from the audience themselves, if there's some post-it notes, yeah.
Yeah.
Just say whatever your last thoughts would be. It really was, how would we inscribe? What do we take away?
Sorry?
What is your last word?
My last words. Well, I'm very happy to be here again, and I hope you invite me again. So thank you so much for being here.
So I left my post-it notes actually in the green room, but there's, if anybody would like to just do what Yvonne said, you have a thought that you really want to share. What we are doing is we are collecting them, and on the closing ceremony tomorrow, we hope to share as many of these as possible. Let me also encourage you, if you were here for the opening ceremony, one of the things that came from all the writers was that they really do want to engage. We haven't brought them here to perform for us, right? We've brought them here to engage, to have conversations, for them to get to know us, as well as us to get to know them. So please take the time in between. That's why there's some space between sessions where you could go and just tell them how much you love their work, or how much you loathe their work, what you feel about it, and then also the things that you don't know. There is no ignorant question. It is a question of saying, I want to know you out of the diversity that you are. I really, 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 really want to thank everybody who has come. It's so appreciated. And to remind you that at the top of the hour, we will have the next session, right? So it'll be right here in this room. There's another session over at Ukumbi Mdogo. But please, let's continue dreaming and inscribing Africa as we move to a new future. Thank you very much.
Just say whatever you